The silence in courtroom, one for B, was thick, dense with curiosity, tension, and the low hum of anticipation that always preceded a high-profile trial. The gallery was packed, elbows grazing in rows of polished oak benches, reporters perched with notepads ready, lenses waiting to flash. The marble columns stood tall around them, cold and grand like the law itself. A case like this didn't come around often. Billionaire tech mogul Grayson Locke versus the people. A man accused of manipulating markets, silencing whistleblowers, and building his empire on secrets. The trial had already made headlines for months, but no one was prepared for what happened next. The door behind the bench opened with a creak that cut through the murmurs like a blade. Judge Langston Hale stepped through, black robes crisp, posture straight, eyes steady and slow in their gaze. He carried his years like armor. His face, carved by time and resolve, bore no trace of hesitation. He didn't command the room with volume. He didn't need to. His presence alone was a statement of experience, of discipline, of the quiet strength born from decades spent resisting compromise. As the bailiff's voice rang out, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Langston Hale." The entire courtroom stood with rustling obedience, except one dot at the defense table. Grayson Locke remained seated, not slouched, not unaware, seated with intention. His expensive gray suit caught the overhead light just right. His designer shoes, crossed at the ankle like he was lounging at a country club instead of facing federal charges. His perfectly gelled hair hadn't moved since breakfast. In his hand, a platinum smartphone gleamed as he scrolled without concern. No flinch, no hesitation. A ripple ran through the room, a collective blink. Reporters raised their heads. Prosecutor Elena Navarro's brow furrowed. Even Grayson's high-powered defense team led by the icy and formidable Sylvia Wexler glanced at him. In alarm, Judge Hale didn't react immediately. He simply lowered himself into his seat with the same calm, deliberate motion as always. He arranged his files, adjusted his glasses. Then he looked directly at Grayson Locke. "Mr. Locke," he said, voice low but resonant, "in this courtroom, we rise as a sign of respect for the law, not the man. You will stand." Grayson didn't even bother to look up at first. Then, slowly, like a man stretching a bored smirk, he tilted his head, met Hale's gaze, and said, "I only stand for real power, Your Honor." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, heavy, charged like a storm. In that moment, the worlds collided, one shaped by generational wealth, privilege, and unchecked arrogance, and one shaped by decades of grit, sweat, and the belief that no man, no matter his name or net worth, was above the law. Judge Hale's expression did not change, but something in the room shifted, as if the air itself was waiting for him to speak again. "You have one more opportunity," Hale said evenly, "to correct yourself." Grayson shrugged. "I think I'll pass." The gallery erupted gasps, murmurs, a clicking frenzy of camera shutters. The court officers tensed. Sylvia Wexler leaned in and hissed something into her client's ear, but Grayson waved her off like she was background noise. Judge Hale looked at the bailiff. "Let the record reflect that the defendant refused to stand for this court. We will proceed." And just like that, power changed hands outside the courthouse within minutes. News outlets had the story. A billionaire defying a black judge. Social media lit up with hashtags. Political commentators spun it both ways. Some called Grayson a symbol of bold independence. Others decried it as naked racism and elite entitlement. Hale's face was everywhere by noon. But inside the courtroom, the real war had just begun. As Hale turned to the first motion, he never once looked back at Grayson. He didn't need to. The rules had been written long before Grayson Locke was born. This wasn't a boardroom. This wasn't Silicon Valley. This was a courtroom, his courtroom. And Grayson, for all his billions and bravado, had just made the first fatal mistake. He'd underestimated the man who refused to be bought. The city couldn't stop talking. Overnight, the footage had gone viral. Grayson Locke, the billionaire with a diamond-encrusted ego, smirking in court as he refused to stand for the black judge presiding over his federal trial. Memes circulated, news anchors debated it, cable panels spun it into a cultural war. Was it arrogance? Was it racism? Was it just another billionaire daring the system to touch him? Inside courtroom, one for B, the storm hadn't passed. It had just begun to form its eye. Judge Langston Hale sat at the bench the next morning, dignified and composed, as if the firestorm outside hadn't touched him. But behind his calm gaze was a mind moving like a blade cutting through noise. testing pressure points, watching every move. This wasn't about ego. This wasn't even about Grayson Locke anymore. This was about the line that had just been drawn, not in the media, but in the courtroom between law and lawlessness. Grayson entered late, not rushed, not apologetic, just late. He walked like a man entering his own office, not a courtroom that could destroy him. His suit was a slightly bolder shade to day-deep navy silk, paired with a black-on-black tie. His jaw clean-shaven, his teeth gleaming with that corporate, camera-ready whiteness. He nodded casually to the gallery, gave the cameras just enough, smirked to stir headlines, then slid into his seat with a yawn. Judge Hale made no mention of the delay. He didn't look up. He didn't need to. He knew what game Grayson was playing. He also knew this courtroom wasn't a game, not to the single mother defrauded out of her home by Locke's real estate shell company, not to the elderly veteran who lost his pension after investing in Grayson's now disgraced tech IPO, and not to the dozens of employees who'd been fired, threatened, or silenced after discovering what Grayson had buried in offshore accounts. The prosecution's first witness was a former compliance officer, Derek Lynn, a soft-spoken man whose hands shook as he took the stand. Under questioning from Ada Elena Navarro, he revealed how Locke Enterprises had created layered trust shells, a web of fake nonprofits that funneled money from investors straight into private accounts overseas. Were you ever pressured not to report these discrepancies? Navarro asked. Derek swallowed hard. Yes, I was told if I brought it up again, they'd make it look like I had committed securities fraud, that I'd lose everything. From the defense table, Grayson chuckled audibly. We hire the best PR firms, he whispered to his lawyer, not even bothering to hide it. Judge Hale paused the proceedings. Mr. Locke, he said with a razor's edge in his voice, do you find the witness's fear amusing? I find the entire process amusing, Grayson replied, not missing a beat. We're talking about financial decisions, risk, not war crimes. Judge Hale leaned slightly forward. Financial crimes committed with the precision and disregard of a warlord are crimes, Mr. Locke. And in this courtroom, no amount of amusement will shield you from accountability. There was a beat of stunned silence before Elena Navarro resumed. But something had shifted. For the first time, Grayson's smirk faded, not entirely, but the edge of it dulled. After court recessed for lunch, a storm waited for Judge Hale outside. Reporters shouted questions. Protesters held signs supporting Hale. Others called him biased. One sign read, respect is earned, not demanded. Another, Locke walks, the system fails. In his chambers, Judge Hale stared out the tall windows, his mind far away from the noise. He thought of his father, an army medic in Vietnam, who taught him discipline and quiet strength, who'd stood on picket lines for civil rights, only to return home and be told his service meant less than the color of his skin. Don't ever let them tell you who's worth more, his father had said. Not with their money, not with their titles. In the courtroom, we all answer to the truth. Langston Hale had spent 30 years living by those words, but Grayson Locke wasn't like the others. He didn't just break the rules, he made it fashionable. And now, even the walls of this court were starting to echo with the sound of a war, not just a justice, but a perception. That afternoon, a sealed envelope was found on Hale's desk. No sender, no fingerprints. Inside was a single photograph. It showed a young man dead by suicide. Case file number 0439. A yellow sticky note was attached. He ruined more than portfolios. Ask what happened to Devin Marks. Hale's breath caught. That name, it stirred something. A memory buried beneath a decade of cases. He pulled the file from the archives himself. Devin Marks, 17, accused of hacking a tech server. No clear motive. No trial. Charges dropped after his death. The company in question, Locke Enterprises. That night, Judge Hale sat alone in his home office, the file spread open before him. The photo showed a skinny boy with big eyes and a nervous smile. The kind of kid who believed he could change the world with a laptop. But someone else had changed it for him, destroyed it. His wife entered quietly and placed a hand on his shoulder. You've got that look again. This kid, Hale murmured, tapping the file. He died under suspicious circumstances connected to Locke's company. The charges evaporated, just like the evidence. His wife was silent for a moment, then said softly, maybe Locke isn't the one on trial. Maybe it's the whole machine he built. Judge Hale didn't sleep that night. Not well, because he knew what Grayson Locke had done with power. But worse, He knew how much of the system had been built to protect men like him. The next day, in court, the battle would deepen. Grayson wasn't just defending himself. He was testing whether justice could even touch him. And Langston Hale, the last man standing between order and rot, was about to learn just how far the rot had spread, because Grayson didn't need to win this trial. He just needed to prove no one else could stop him. The storm outside Courthouse 1 for B didn't fade, it evolved. Protest signs gave way to satellite vans. Analysts didn't just debate the case anymore, they dissected every glance, every inflection, every breath from Judge Langston Hale and Grayson. Locke. The footage of Locke refusing to stand had gone global. Now every day felt like the country was watching a live referendum on truth, power, and what it really meant to hold someone above the law accountable. But inside the courtroom, something more dangerous than media frenzy was brewing. Grayson. Locke had started to feel it too. He still wore his confidence like armor-sleek suits, smug smiles, offhand jokes whispered to his defense attorney like he was bored in algebra class. But the chill in his eyes was different, colder, tighter. He had underestimated Hale once. He wasn't going to do it again. That morning, the prosecution introduced something new, a subpoenaed series of encrypted emails between Locke and a former cybersecurity consultant, one who had mysteriously died in a boating accident 6 years ago. The emails were heavily redacted, but the subject lines alone suggested a different war had been fought behind the curtains of Locke. Enterprises contained Devin Marks incident. Read 1. Push investigation toward school systems network make. Hint the leak. Read another. When Ellen and Navarro read them aloud, the gallery shifted uncomfortably. Everyone could feel it. The case was no longer just about insider trading or money laundering. It was about something darker, something deliberate. Judge Hale asked for a recess. He sat alone in his chambers for nearly an hour, eyes fixed on the black and white photo of Devin Marks from the file, his narrow shoulders, his overgrown hair, his hopeful eyes dulled by fear. The boy had been arrested based on digital evidence that later vanished from official records. There had been no public apology, no investigation, just silence, and then his death. A soft knock pulled Hale from his thoughts. It was Officer Geneva Cole, a young black officer who had been quietly assigned to security detail for high-risk witnesses in the case. She stepped in hesitantly and closed the door behind her. "Your Honor," she said, her voice low, "you don't know me, but I think someone's playing a much bigger game than just this trial." She slid a manila folder onto Hale's desk. "It's not official, not yet, but last night I intercepted an off-record transfer request. One of our systems flagged it as suspicious because the receiving party was a deleted badge number belonged to Detective Cal Hewitt. He died 4 years ago." Hale's brow furrowed, and the source, the payment came from a Cayman account under the name Detmer Holdings. Hale sat back. "Detmer," he said slowly. "Devin Marks." Cole nodded. "Sir, someone's still trying to bury this kid." In that moment, Hale understood something vital. This wasn't just about Locke trying to avoid prison. It was about erasing a crime so old and so hidden that anyone who got close to it risked being taken out of the picture legally, socially, or otherwise. By the time court resumed, the temperature had shifted. Ellen and Navarro entered the courtroom, looking determined but weary. She had received a threatening voicemail the night before, a child's voice reciting her home address over and over again. Grayson knew. He could feel the fear in the air, and he fed on it. When Navarro brought up the emails, Locke interrupted. "They're fake," he snapped, voice sharp for the first time. That consultant was a burnout. He overdosed on his yacht. End of story. Navarro didn't even flinch. "Yes," she replied, "and he overdosed the night before he was scheduled to testify in a SEC investigation. A testimony that never happened." Sylvia Wexler, Grayson's attorney, shifted in her seat. She had begun to realize something dangerous. She was no longer defending a client. She was managing a threat. Then, unexpectedly, Judge Hale spoke. "Mr. Locke," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "do you recall the name Devin Marks?" Grayson blinked once. His expression didn't change. "No," he said flatly. "No memory of a high school student who was accused of breaching your company's servers, only for the case to disappear after his suicide." Grayson smirked. "Thousands of kids get charged with digital crimes. I don't memorize their names." But there was something to quicken his response, a flicker in the eye. The kind that men like Hale had seen for decades from criminals, CEOs, and senators alike. The kind that said, "I'm lying, but you'll never prove it, except this time." He might. Later that evening, as rain streaked down the glass windows of his office, Judge Hale opened a second package, this one left at the courthouse security desk. Inside, a USB stick and a single line scrawled in red pen. He confessed. Before he disappeared. The audio is clean. Hands trembling slightly, Hale inserted the drive into his encrypted laptop. The voice that played through his speakers was unmistakably clear and scared. "I didn't do it. They made it look like I hacked them, but I didn't. I found something about how they were selling data, kids' data, from our school network. And then my emails got deleted, and someone started watching our house. It was Devin Marks, a digital ghost. A boy erased to protect a man now sitting smug in courtroom, 1 for B." Judge Hale sat in the dark, the audio looping behind him like a whisper from the past, and thought, if I don't stop him, no one ever will. Tomorrow, the fight would escalate. Navarro was preparing to call a surprise witness, someone from inside Locke's inner circle. A betrayal. Grayson Locke had spent his life betting onto things, money and fear, but now fear was turning on him, and Judge Hale had just found a voice that couldn't be silenced anymore. The next morning, the courthouse was unusually quiet. No chants from protesters, no reporters leaning over barricades, no clicks from cameras trying to catch Judge Hale's expression. Through tinted glass, just stillness, dense and waiting, the kind of calm that only came before a detonation. Inside courtroom 1 for B, the gallery filled slowly, but the air was different now. Heavier. The trial that had once been about finance, insider trading, embezzlement, tax fraud had mutated into something darker, more personal. Words like hacking, data trafficking, cover-up, and civilian deaths had begun to surface. The prosecution's next move wasn't just about winning a case anymore. It was about tearing open the sealed vault of truth. Grayson Locke sensed it. He walked into the courtroom slower this time, not cautious, just calculating, every step measured. His suit was flawless, as always, but his confidence no longer gleamed. It bristled sharp, defensive, almost paranoid. He leaned into Sylvia Wexler, his defense attorney, and whispered something with clipped urgency. She didn't respond. She just stared straight ahead, across the courtroom. Elena Navarro organized her notes in silence. Her hands trembled not from fear, but anticipation. She was about to flip the table, and she knew it might cost her everything. "Your Honor," she said, rising, her voice steady. "The prosecution would like to call its next witness, Mr. Vincent Hale." The courtroom shifted. A rustle of confusion passed through the gallery. Judge Hale blinked once, then froze. "Miss Navarro," he said slowly, "please approach the bench." She did. So did Sylvia Wexler. This witness was not disclosed in pretrial, Hale said, his tone sharper than usual. "I understand," Eleanor replied carefully, "but the witness requested confidentiality until the moment of testimony. He feared for his life." Sylvia scoffed. "Your Honor, this is a stunt. A late witness with the same last name as you." "Really?" Judge Hale's face didn't move. "Miss Navarro," he said, quieter now, "is the witness related to me?" Eleanor hesitated. "He's your nephew." The room didn't gasp, but it didn't need to. Judge Hale leaned back, stunned into stillness. The very ground beneath his courtroom was shifting. He had no memory of Vincent ever working for Locke. They hadn't spoken in years. Family tension, political differences, silence that turned into distance. "I request a brief recess," Hale finally said, "and I will recuse myself from hearing this testimony. The law is clear." Navarro nodded. "Of course, Your Honor." The alternate judge is already on standby for this portion. When Judge Hale stepped down, it was the first time in his career he did so, not with control, but with regret. He watched from a private chamber as his nephew took the stand. Vincent Hale was in his late 20s, tall and weary, with wary eyes and a voice like someone always looking over his shoulder. He was a former cybersecurity contractor at Locke Enterprises, fired, vanished from public life, presumed bought off or silenced. Until now. "What made you come forward?" the new judge asked. Vincent's throat bobbed as he swallowed. "Because I saw what happened to Devin Marks, and I saw what was going to happen to anyone else who tried to expose the truth." He turned to the gallery. "And because I saw my uncle Judge Langston Hale stand up to the kind of power most people would run from." That gave me courage. He described a hidden server system inside Locke Enterprises, a black site database called Skychamber, not for financial records, but for profiles. Thousands of names, Vincent explained. Activists, regulators, kids, anyone who crossed Grayson. Each file had notes, emails, locations, family info, psychological assessments, and plans. Grayson's face was stone now. He didn't blink, didn't fidget, but his knuckles whitened around the edge of the table, and Devin, Navarro asked softly. Vincent nodded. He wasn't a hacker. He was a kid who stumbled onto a Skychamber node through a corrupted school network. He saw metadata, nothing incriminating on its own, but enough for someone to panic. And what did Locke do? Vincent looked down. He ordered a ghost protocol, framed Devin through planted files, sent private contractors to surveil his family. It worked. Devin killed himself a week later. A collective exhale swept the gallery. Navarro's voice cracked, only slightly when she spoke again. Do you have proof? Vincent reached into a sealed evidence bag. I stole this before I left, he said. It's a portable drive, redundant backups, server logs, audio, passwords. It's all there. When the drive was handed over, Judge Hale, watching from his private chamber, felt something fracture inside him, not just as a judge, not just as a black man who had risen through the hardest system in the country, but as an uncle, a protector, a man who had spent a lifetime drawing lines between truth and power, only to realize that his own blood had walked alone into the fire he himself couldn't see. But outside that chamber, the war wasn't slowing. That evening, Navarro's car was rammed off the road. She survived with a fractured collarbone. Her assistant wasn't so lucky, hospitalized in critical condition. The message was clear. Grayson Locke might be bleeding now, but he was still dangerous. The next morning, Judge Hale returned to the bench. The courtroom stood as he entered, including Grayson, but Hale didn't acknowledge the gesture. Respect, once refused, meant nothing once it was performed for cameras. He simply looked ahead and said, "Court is now in session." Behind him, Vincent's drive was being analyzed by federal investigators. But Hale knew something they didn't. Grayson Locke wasn't done yet, and the real war, the one fought in shadows, was about to surface. The morning sun poured through the towering windows of courtroom 1 for B, but it felt cold inside, too clean, too sterile, as if the building itself was bracing for something. For weeks, the trial had peeled back layer after layer of Grayson Locke's empire, fraud, intimidation, bribery, surveillance, even a young man's death. But something about today felt final. The hush that filled the room wasn't just silence, it was dread disguised as stillness. Judge Langston Hale sat straighter than usual, as if his spine were made of steel. No tremor in his voice, no sign of the weight on his shoulders, but behind his sharp, dark eyes was a war of thought. Vincent's testimony had changed everything. The encrypted drive he brought in, Skychamber, was now the focus of a federal task force. It revealed names, strategies, payouts, political bribes, even judges, including one sitting just 3 courtrooms away. The rot ran deeper than even Hale had feared. Grayson Locke entered like a ghost of his former self. No smirk, no tailored suit. He wore the same outfit as yesterday, creased, unpolished, as if the uniform of power had lost its shine. But his silence wasn't surrender. It was something worse. It was calculation. Next to him, Sylvia Wexler sat with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Yesterday, she tried to resign from the case after receiving a USB filled with surveillance footage of her teenage son. She walked into Hale's chambers that evening, eyes glassy, voice hollow. "He knows where my child goes to school," she'd said. What kind of man threatens a 14-year-old boy to win a court case? Judge Hale had answered without hesitation, one who already knows he's losing. But Sylvia hadn't resigned. She couldn't. Not because she believed in her client, but because she'd signed a confidentiality clause that bound her unless death or disbarment severed it. Grayson had her cornered. And she wasn't the only one. That morning's witness was unexpected. Congresswoman Lydia Voss, chair of the House Oversight Committee, one of Locke's longtime political allies. Her name had appeared dozens of times in the Skychamber files, bank transfers, private meetings. Voting records shifted after mysterious deposits. Now she sat in the witness box, pale but poised. "I want to make something very clear," she said into the mic. "I came forward voluntarily. Mr. Locke paid me, yes. I accepted campaign donations laundered through nonprofits. I passed legislation that benefited his companies. I even lobbied to remove SEC oversight from his subsidiaries. But I didn't. No. About the boy, she paused. When I found out what happened to Devin Marks, I knew this wasn't just corruption. It was cruelty. The gallery barely breathed as she recounted how Locke used personal data mined from education software to target families, children, and even suicide prevention counselors who raised concerns. The algorithm wasn't just tracking markets. It was tracking people who might threaten him. Sky Chamber, she said, was never about protecting investments. It was a kill switch. Psychological warfare hidden in analytics. When Elena Navarro approached for cross-examination, she moved, slowly, her broken collarbone still healing under her blazer. She didn't start with a question, she started with a name. Julia Briggs. Congresswoman Voss flinched. Elena continued, a junior analyst in your office. She warned you 3 times about Locke's companies before being reassigned, then terminated. She attempted suicide 2 months later. Did you know that? Voss was silent. Did you care? Tears formed in Voss's eyes, but she didn't speak, Your Honor, Elena said, turning to Judge Hale. I ask that the court accept Congresswoman Voss's testimony not only as evidence of corruption, but of a systemic conspiracy to suppress dissent and weaponize fear led by Grayson Locke. Judge Hale nodded once, noted, but even as the record accepted her testimony, Hale's gut turned. He could feel it that today wouldn't end with a gavel. There was something unfinished in the air, something waiting to strike. The moment came during the lunch recess. Judge Hale was walking back to his chambers when Officer Geneva Cole intercepted him. Sir, she said quietly, we found something. She handed him a still image printed from a traffic cam feed taken just 10 minutes earlier. It showed the unmarked black SUVs parked outside a private school. The school his grandson, Elijah, attended. Judge Hale's hand clenched so hard the page crinkled. I want full security on my family now, he said, and subpoena every vehicle in that frame. But it was more than a threat. It was a message. Locke still had reach, still had muscle, still had ways to hurt people. The afternoon session resumed with a new kind of electricity. The gallery was full of whispering lawyers, camera crews, even federal observers. A major news network began broadcasting the trial live for the first time. The nation was watching. And then Judge Hale made his move. Before we proceed, he said, eyes fixed on Grayson, the court will hear one final piece of evidence submitted this morning. He nodded to Officer Cole, who entered with a laptop. A screen lowered. And a video began to play. It was grainy. Surveillance footage from inside a luxury office. Grayson Locke stood in front of a whiteboard. Around him, 2 unnamed aides, a digital analyst, and a man previously identified as a special consultant for strategic litigation outcomes. On the screen, Grayson picked up a marker. We already own the algorithms, he said. We just need to neutralize dissent before it reaches velocity. Navarro's family is offshore. Use that. Hale's grandson, we send a car. Make it look like a precaution. It's enough to shake him. His voice was cold, detached, like he was ordering lunch. And then came the line that would ripple across the country. You want to know why I didn't stand up for that judge? Because I don't stand for symbols. I bury them. The video cut. Silence followed. The kind that no one dared break. Not even Sylvia Wexler. Grayson Locke sat perfectly still. For the first time in weeks, there was no mask, no performance, just a man with nowhere left to run. Judge Hale spoke calmly. Let the record show the defendant's own words have confirmed intent to intimidate witnesses, threaten federal officers, and influence trial outcomes through illegal means. The court will recess for 30 minutes before rendering preliminary judgment on evidentiary suppression. He struck the gavel once. As he stood to leave, Grayson suddenly stood to his voice, rising across the courtroom. This isn't over, he shouted. You don't understand what you're doing. The bailiff stepped forward. I built this city. I paid for your roads, your schools, your elections. Judge Hale didn't look back because he didn't need to. Grayson Locke had just done something no evidence could. He confessed to the one thing he'd never admit. Fear. As the courtroom emptied and the news van scrambled to broadcast the meltdown, the city stood still for a moment, watching justice rise like smoke over a fire that had burned a long. And in the quiet of his chambers, Judge Hale looked down at a single photograph. Devin Marks, smiling in a school photo, unaware that one day his name would bring down giants. The war wasn't over, But the tide had turned. Tomorrow, the world would hear the sentence. The city was holding its breath. It wasn't just a trial anymore, it was something deeper, something darker, a reckoning. Courtroom, 1-4B had become the nation's most watched battlefield. Not a place where law was administered, but where it was tested to see whether it could withstand the pressure of wealth, power, intimidation, and the scars of buried sins. Judge Langston Hale entered without fanfare, robes swaying lightly with each purposeful step. There was no bailiff's bark, no pomp, just a low hum of tension pressing against every wall. Hale's eyes scanned the room not to search, but to measure. He could sense it. Something about today was different, like lightning waiting to find ground. Grayson Locke was already there. For once, he stood when Hale entered. But it wasn't respect. It was control, a gesture he'd been told to make by his handlers, optics consultants, or maybe the last piece of himself still pretending to care what the world saw. He wore a navy pinstripe that looked handwoven, but his face told another story. Gone was the curated smirk, the performative charm. His eyes were restless now, less like a wolf, more like a wounded animal sensing the walls closing in, and they were because behind the scenes, everything was unraveling. The sky chamber data had broken wide. Federal agents were knocking on doors across state lines. More names, more bribes, more buried truths. The network that once made Locke invincible was hemorrhaging loyalty by the hour. His own people were jumping ship. Literally. One of his private pilots had turned in flight logs showing unauthorized trips to non-extradition countries. His former CTO had surrendered her phone containing voice notes from Locke mocking regulators and instructing assistants to clean up certain evidence. And now, there was the janitor. That's what Elena Navarro had called him. Quietly, she'd slipped the motion onto the docket that morning, without warning. A motion to admit late testimony from a man who had cleaned Locke's corporate offices for 10 years. The man Grayson never noticed, never saw until now. I called to the stand, Navarro said, rising with all the grace of a blade being unsheathed. Mr. Hugo Daniels. He walked slowly to the witness chair, mid-50s, dark skin, hands calloused, eyes sharp despite the years. He wore a plain work shirt, no legal prep, no politics, just truth. Grayson blinked and froze, because he did recognize the man now. Mr. Daniels, Navarro began. Please tell the court what you found the night of February 3rd. Hugo spoke softly. There was a meeting in the executive conference room, late, past 1 a.m. Mr. Locke was there. So was a man I'd seen before called himself an outside strategist. Another was from the police department. He paused. Eyes steady. They were talking about a kid, a hacker. Said he found something he wasn't supposed to. Mr. Locke laughed. Said it was no big deal. That suicides are cleaner than trials. A gasp cut through the gallery. Grayson's jaw twitched. Navarro leaned in. Did you report this? Hugo nodded. To internal security. Next day I was transferred. 2 days later, my pay was docked. A week after that, my wife's car was set on fire. We had to move. He opened a worn envelope and handed it to the bailiff. These are the letters I wrote. Emails, screenshots. I kept everything for 10 years. Judge Hale looked at the pile. His fingers hovered over the evidence like a penis preparing to place something sacred. When he opened the first letter and saw the handwriting tight, neat, pleading, it didn't feel like evidence. It felt like a cry the world had refused to hear. Until now. But Grayson Locke wasn't done. Not yet. The moment Hugo stepped down, Sylvia Wexler, his own attorney, stood. Your Honor, she said, voice tight. The defense would like to call its next witness. Judge Hale frowned. You have not submitted any additional witnesses for today. We're invoking a sealed emergency motion, she said, sliding the paperwork across the bench. This witness has new, material evidence. From the back doors of the courtroom, a woman entered. Blonde, corporate, young. Everyone turned. Elena Navarro's heart dropped. It was Alexis Vale, Grayson's former executive assistant, and secretly his mistress. The woman who had disappeared from the public eye 2 years ago after being subpoenaed in a data privacy case that mysteriously collapsed. Judge Hale's voice was measured. You may proceed. Alexis sat. And then said, softly, I'm not here to defend him. The room shifted. Sylvia blinked. Excuse me. Alexis turned to face Grayson. I'm here to explain what kind of man he really is. Grayson's fist clenched under the table. I have access to the internal communications of Skychamber, Alexis said. Encrypted files. Hidden servers. I was told to delete them. I didn't. I made backups. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Navarro asked. Alexis exhaled. Because I was pregnant, and I was afraid. Another gasp. Grayson's head snapped up. Alexis continued. I lost the baby. After Grayson's people found out I still had the drives, they made it look like an accident. But it wasn't. She reached into her coat and handed the bailiff a secure drive. I don't want money. I don't want protection. I just want it to stop. Grayson Locke rose to his feet. She's lying. He shouted. You think I'd need to threaten anyone? I built half this city. Sit down, Mr. Locke. Hale said calmly. But Locke wasn't listening anymore. His world was fracturing too fast. They're all liars, he spat, pointing to Alexis, then Navarro, then Judge Hale. This isn't a trial, it's revenge. No, Hale replied, his voice cutting like a razor. This is justice, and it doesn't answer to you. The bailiffs moved toward Locke. He shoved his chair back, knocking it over. I own this city. Judge Hale stood. No, Mr. Locke, he said, voice ringing through the chamber. You bought it, and now it's asking for its receipt. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Grayson lunged toward the bench before being tackled by bailiffs. Cameras captured every second. Reporters scrambled to beam the meltdown to millions. Protesters outside began to chant in unison, no one is above the law. No one is above the law. When it was over, Locke was dragged from the courtroom screaming, red-faced, defeated, and the entire world saw it. For the first time, the man who never bowed broke in his chambers later that night. Judge Hale sat alone with the sealed drive Alexis had given the court. He inserted it into his secure laptop. The folder blinked open. Inside were voice memos. Photos, bank statements. List of names. And videos. One folder was labeled Hale. Judge Hale opened it. What he saw froze him. It wasn't blackmail. It was worse. It was surveillance footage of him from 6 years ago. At home. At church. With his family. He stared at the screen, trembling. Grayson Locke had been watching him for years. This wasn't just a trial. It had been a chessboard all along. But Grayson had played for control. Hale. He played for the soul of the system. Tomorrow would be sentencing. And tomorrow, the system would speak. It rained the morning of sentencing. Not a storm. Not a drizzle. Just a slow, steady downpour. The kind that seemed to wash the world clean in patient strokes. Outside courthouse 1 for B. The sidewalks were lined with silent protesters' umbrellas, tilted like shields, signs held in trembling hands. Rainwater running down cardboard letters that read Justice Matters and Stand for Devon inside. The atmosphere was suffocating. Cameras rolled. The gallery was at capacity. Every juror had returned to witness the final act. Lawyers, federal agents, victims, journalists, all of them gathered under one roof to see if justice would finally speak, not in whispers, not in compromised deals, but in a voice loud enough to echo through history. At 9:01 a.m., the courtroom doors open. Judge Langston Hale entered, his robe darker than usual under the courtroom lights. His walk was slower today, not from age but from weight, the weight of every file, every name, every life ruined by the man sitting at the defense table. Grayson Locke, once untouchable, now shackled. He sat still in his orange prison uniform, posture stiff, chin high. The mask of arrogance was gone. What remained wasn't remorse. It was rage, cold, patient rage, like a man who had lost the game but was already planning the next one. Court is now in session, the bailiff announced. Judge Hale gave no nod, no preamble. He simply opened a folder. His voice, when it came, was a mixture of fire and stone. Mr. Grayson Locke, you stand convicted of 31 federal crimes, including fraud, obstruction, conspiracy, data trafficking, witness intimidation, and indirect complicity in the death of Devin Marks. The name pierced the room like thunder. Hale continued, in this trial, the court heard from victims, whistleblowers, corporate insiders, public servants, and those you thought too small to matter. But they mattered here, every single one of them. Locke didn't blink. You called justice a commodity, said every man has a price, but you were wrong. Some men cannot be bought. Some laws cannot be bent, and some names will not be erased. He looked down briefly at a photo on his desk. Devin Marks, age 17, smiling in a school hallway. This young man died because you decided his life was an acceptable loss. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. This court does not forget him. Judge Hale looked back up. Nor will it forget what you tried to build. A system where wealth replaced truth, where data replaced dignity, and where power replaced principle. You used technology not to innovate, but to manipulate. You made tools not to build the future, but to bury the present. Elena Navarro wiped a tear from her cheek. In the gallery, Vincent Hale held his breath. Alexis Vale sat forward. Officer. Geneva Cole stood at the back, hand resting on her badge, and then came the sentence. Mr. Locke, this court sentences you to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. All personal and corporate assets obtained through illicit means will be seized and repurposed into a fund for victims of corporate abuse and technology-driven fraud. You are permanently barred from holding any executive, advisory, or ownership role in any company, nonprofit, or data-related organization within the United States. Gasps broke through the room. Hale didn't stop. Additionally, he said, your sentence will include a provision rarely invoked in this court. Public accountability sentencing. Your trial, the evidence, the names of your victims, and every tactic you used will be permanently archived in the National Museum of Justice. You may no longer hide behind lawyers or lobbyists. History will remember what you did. For a long moment, Grayson said nothing. Then, finally, he spoke. You think this ends with me? He growled. But you've only made me a symbol. They'll come after you. They'll come after your family. This doesn't scare people like me. It just pisses us off. Judge Hale stepped forward, not as a judge now, but as a man. I am not afraid of your anger, Mr. Locke, he said, voice deep and quiet. I've seen what fear does. It silences the poor. It handcuffs the innocent. It buries boys like Devin. But I've never seen fear win, and I don't plan to start today. He turned to the marshals. Remove the defendant. Grayson Locke was taken from the courtroom. He didn't look back. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. Because this time, there was nothing left to manipulate. The moment he left, a strange thing happened. The room didn't erupt in cheers. It exhaled. As if it had been holding in a breath for far too long. As the gallery emptied, cameras flashing, murmurs rising, one by one, people paused to look at Judge Hale. But he didn't look for applause. He looked down again at Devin's photo, then quietly slipped it back into the folder. Later that day, Elena Navarro stood beside the statue of Lady Justice in the courthouse plaza. Surrounded by reporters, a child tugged her coat. Are you the lady who helped catch the bad guy? He asked. Elena smiled. No, she said. I just helped the truth find its voice elsewhere. Claire Marks, Devin's mother, stood at her son's grave, holding a tablet. On it, she watched the clip of Grayson Locke's sentencing. She didn't cry. She just nodded once, like a storm finally passing after a long, terrible drought. And in his chambers, Judge Langston Hale packed up a few personal things. Not because he was leaving, but because he was preparing. A letter lay open on his desk. A FEDRAL nomination offer. A chance to take everything he'd stood for and carry it to the next battlefield. He folded the letter and put it away. His grandson Elijah burst in minutes later, holding a drawing. It showed a judge holding a gavel, facing off against a giant monster made of money and flames. Elijah grinned. I drew you fighting the bad guys. Hale smiled. You got the ending right, he said, but as he looked out the window at the city healing, at the people remembering how to believe in something again, he understood the truth. This wasn't the end. It was the start of a system remembering how to feel. How to fight. How to stand, even when some refused to, and especially when it matters most. Justice had finally stood its ground. And this time, the world stood with it.